Who we have this week? We have Daren Lightfoot. Now, those of you who do not know Daren, he's a big contributor to the community. This guy knows Python. This guy is very highly skilled in the world of DevOps. So, look, if you don't know Python, or even if you do, and looking to learn a little bit more, check us out this week. Daren, I promise you, I don't know anyone who can teach Python as well as Daren in an hour's time. So give us your thoughts, comments, and look, see you next week.
Do you understand? Once you all can see it, please let me know.
It's visible. It's up.
Awesome. Okay.
I can see it.
All right. Let's go in presenter mode. There we go. All right. So today we'll be covering Python network automation. The goal here is to help you take your skills to the next level. My name is Daren Lightfoot. I am a developer advocate for Cisco DevNet. Now, a little about me before we get started. I'm an Air Force veteran. I mentioned that I'm a developer advocate for Cisco DevNet. I'm the founder of Lab Every Day. I started on the help desk, and now I'm here. And what I mean by that is that I got my start in the help desk, which a lot of times is looked down upon, frowned upon, as a place that people don't really want to start. But I gained a ton of foundational skills like communication with people, presenting different technologies, researching different technologies, and I say grit, you know what I mean? Because help desk will really put you through it. So I'm thankful for that opportunity. I spent 10 years designing, implementing, and supporting enterprise network environments. I have my ccnp, I'm devnet certified, and several other certifications. Now, where do we start? Before we get started, have any of you actually started in network programmability? Have you written code in Python? Do you know Python?
Don't be shy. Inga, can you start this one?
Oh, I haven't. I'm about to take automation class on May 26th, so I'm pretty excited about that. But I'm very new to automation, and I'm very afraid of it at the moment.
They understand. I totally understand. Anyone else?
I don't know Python either, sir. This is Dana.
Okay. All good. I didn't know Python at one point and still learning all the time. I can't say I know Python because it's a programming language. So it's constantly evolving. Anyone else before we keep going? Awesome. All right. So for those of you that are looking to get started in network programmability and learning Python and knowing about the tools that are out there that to help you get started, Cisco DevNet, if you have not been to the resources that we have, developer.cisco.com, we have start now content to help you get started in coding, learning more about APIs, learning more about Cisco technologies. We have learning labs on pretty much anything you want to learn, whether it's CSR routers, Nexus, ACI, DNAC, NSO, you name it when it comes to Meraki, Cisco technologies, and automating that technology. There's content that is on Cisco DevNet available for you, along with sandboxes to give you access to those tools. You don't have to try to use Craigslist or Amazon to find these tools. We have them free and readily available here at developer.cisco.com. Now, another question that people have network automation is why Python? I'm gonna kind of break it down. One is because Python is amazingly flexible, it's highly supported, and it's an extremely versatile tool. Derek kind of spoke about when he used Ansible. People often say, use Ansible till it no longer works for what you wanted to accomplish. Ansible is written in Python. So when you think about Ansible, it's configuration that allows you to a wide range of devices by using programmability. Python allows you to expand upon that. So it's a tool. It's nothing but a tool. Ansible is a tool. It works for you. Awesome. Post tool. That's awesome. Terraform is a tool. It works for you. That's awesome. If you do your job more efficiently and through programmability and automation. Now, going back, why Python? Well, the thing about Python allows you to expand your capabilities in areas that Ansible and other tools. And since Python is a software programming language, it gives you the ability to put the network at your fingertips. And let me explain what I mean by that. Python is one of the most popular languages. It has over 100,000 software packages that already have, which is already developed code that you can use and import in your code to do functions and to do jobs in your code for you. You don't have to rewrite code. A lot of packages are already available. Specifically for network automation, there's over 10,000 packages that is available for automation. The screenshot that you're looking at is from pypy.org, which is which is Python's packaging managed website. There's a ton of libraries out there to help you get started with your Python software development journey. And then Cisco also includes its Python execution engine on many of its platforms, including Nexus and iOS XE. So there's so many reasons to get started with Python and resources to help you, learn more. The community is huge. Now, when we think of traditional networking, we know the CLI. You SSH into a device and you configure that device one at a time. I know myself, I've done so many different configurations where I have my notepad set up on one side, and on the other side, I have my terminal set up, and I'm copying from notepad. I paste my config into the router, and then it breaks. There's a piece of code in the configuration that I didn't see. There's some invisible bytecode that gets copied and does not copy over to the router. There's so many times that's happened to me, and it's error prone is what I'm saying. CLI can be very error prone. Python gives you the ability to write your code, to send those configurations to a device, to kind of alleviate those errors that happen from us humans, because you can use tools like PyTS, Genie, and so many other tools to test your code, to create these test beds. That the possibilities with using software development is endless. It's all about how much you want to learn, how much work you put into it. And like I mentioned before, I had to start from somewhere. And when I first started, it was daunting. It took me years to learn the code. I started with Java, I started with C#, I've done C++, and none of those really stuck. But since Python is so human readable, it's highly supported, Python is one of those languages, for me, it is the language that I was able to gravitate to and get started with. Now, how do you install Python? Everything to get started with Python is on python.org. You go there, it's supported on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Gives you all the information you need to download and install it on your system. As well, we have additional resources at developer.cisco.com to help you set up your entire development environment. Now, that's going to be Python, that's going to be your text editor, that's going to be your IDE, and all of those tools we'll kind of talk about more in this presentation.
Hey, Dewan, let me ask you a question. Which
Yeah.
operating system is your favorite when developing Python code?
I would say Mac. I would say Mac.
You do most of your development from a Mac?
Yeah, I do most of my development from Mac. I like Linux, it's good. Windows, not so much. And the reason why I say not so much Windows is because when I'm writing my code, a lot of times I'm running my code in containers. And since Windows doesn't really have Docker support, unless you install what is it called, WSM or something like that. Yeah. Unless you install that on Windows, you can't run Docker. So for me, being able to have a Linux or BSD platform to where I can write my code, build my code, execute my code, and test my code just like I expect it to run in production. Um, Linux based is the best.
Okay. All right. I know quite a few of you guys got questions in regards to computer setup. So he kind of mirrored what I said, but we have Hank. Hank does development on Windows, right? Or does he still, or does he Mac?
I never asked him that.
Yeah, I thought
I'm not
Hank.
sure.
Well, we're gonna question Hank as well, but we'll get to someone who does Windows. I know that there's a lot of people in DevNet that do development Windows, but thanks, Duan.
Yeah, it can be done. So the reason why, like I mentioned before, the reason why I switched from developing on Windows is because when I started having my own pipeline, I had to write my code, test it in Linux. I had to use Jenkins. I had to create containers and all of these different tools that are DevOps, which is pretty much Linux. I decided to shift, because it was too much trying to make sure and to Linux. So rather than just keep going through that pain, I alleviated that problem and just switched to a Linux-based platform.
Yeah, for me, at least at least the organizations that I have had as customers and I've been a part of, right? Most of your production, most of your development and scripting is done on Linux, right? So, for example, if you're going to clone a job, I mean, well, obviously clone Linux, it's going to be off a Linux terminal. So it's always been easier for me to develop on using a Linux environment.
But we'll kind of talk about that. So since many of you have no experience with Python, we're going to go ahead and get started and dive into um, understanding the basis of Python. Then we'll put all of that, what we learn here about developing in Python, put that together, and then we'll start testing out some network automation by using the Cisco DevNet sandboxes. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is when you're developing in Python, after you install Python, you're going to have your Python shell or your IDE, often called idle. That can be executed in PowerShell, command prompt, bash, and we'll kind of go over that. But what I like to develop my code in, I like to develop in an IDE, which is VS Code. VS Code gives you the ability to see your code visually. It has what you call a built-in linter, and I'll show you that here. So if you're typing out your code and you're entering the wrong command, the IDE will tell you your syntax errors in your code. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And also it's kind of GUI. It is GUI, so you can view your entire Python package. So if you have multiple Python files, you can see them right there. Now, if you like using the terminal, yes, you can use Vim, VI, or whatever, and you can do all of that there. And we'll kind of go through that here. Now, what I have already installed is VS Code. In VS Code, I can pull up my terminal from right in here. So I'm going to do that. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to use Command Shift in the letter P, and that's going to give me the ability to create a new Python terminal. And so now from here, my terminal is listed below, and I'm running Bash. Like I said, I'm on Mac, so all of your typical Linux commands are listed here in my directory, and Net6 directory. Thank you all for having me on. I don't have any files created, but this is going to be my working directory for this Python presentation. Now, let's kind of talk about what my IDE and what my interpreter allows me to do. With Python, to execute or to get into your Python shell, you're going to type Python. But notice, if you're on a Mac, this is going to put you into Python 2.7. Python 2.7 has been deprecated, no longer supported in production as of January 2020. So that's not what you want to do. So we'll go ahead and exit. We'll do that with open and close parentheses, and that exits us out of the Python shell. I type Python and enter me in the Python shell, and then I type exit to exit the Python shell. Now, to verify that you are going into Python 3, we'll type Python 3 minus I to enter the interactive shell, and that takes us into the interactive shell. And now from here, we can start executing Python commands. The thing about Python, the reason why I like it so much is Python is a compiled language. Some people misquote and say it's not compiled, but the way it compiles is so close to the user and the CPU that it gives you the ability to do line by line execution. And I'll give you an example of that. So now that I'm in a Python shell, I can do some math. 3 plus 3, 9. I can do some multiplication. And from here, 3 times 3, or 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9, right? I can do all of this line by line execution. I can assign variables. So if I just want to say num1 equals 3, now num1 equals 3. And so let's talk about what's actually going on here. When I'm developing code, I often will create a Python file here, and let's call this main.py. I create a main.py. This is my Python file where I can write my code. But when I write my code, in order for me to test this code, I actually have to run this file every time to test how my code is working, right? But the cool thing about Python is I can have my interpreter open, a shell window for Python open, and if I'm writing a line of code, I can copy that code into the shell, execute the Python code, and know if it works. And then I can come up here and I can start writing my lines of code here. Does that kind of make sense? And I'll give you some examples.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So
What's up?
when you say testing, like, do you normally write your code and then test within this shell on a test terminal?
Yes. So when I'm thinking of code I want to write, a lot of times I'll do kind of like a rough draft. I'll do a visual copy of an outline of what I want my code to do and what I want to accomplish. And then once I do that, now I need to think about the first thing I want to write. So let's say I want to write some code that says hello world. That's what everybody does. Well, I need to make sure the functionality of that code is right. So what I would do is I'll write the print statement. I need to make a string to say hello world. And I need to make sure this is going to print the way I want it to print. So I'll put it in the shell. Okay, that works. And now that that works, I can just copy it, put it up here in my Python file, exit out of the shell, and I can execute that file now because I know it works. That's the way I develop my code. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Perfectly, yeah. Duan,
Okay.
you had mentioned the IDE earlier. It checks your syntax. So if you write something incorrect, I'm assuming it's not in the bottom portion there, right? The terminal that's in your top, like that would be the output. Like if you,
Okay. So
I think I'm asking this really wrong. I'm sorry.
no, I'm following you. I'm following. Let me break it down. So the bottom portion here is my terminal, right?
Mhm.
This top portion is going to be my Python file or my text file or whatever file. This is going to be my files here. And to the left is going to be my directory structure or my workflow, my workspace.
Okay.
So every file that I have in this directory, I will see them here. And when I click on these files, it will open the file here. And then I can close that and I can open a new terminal below. And so from this terminal, it gives me a bash shell that I can either execute the file, enter the Python shell, I can SSH into a device, just like you use a regular bash shell.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, cool. So we kind of talked about, oh, you asked about the linting portion. Let's talk about that. So I just did the print hello world. Now let's do this. You see that red line?
Mm-hmm.
That red line is telling me that I'm entering a command in Python that Python does not recognize. And if I hover over it, now it's telling me that I have an undefined variable pint. And this pylint is telling me that. So there's linting going on in Python that's telling me that I have a variable or function that's not defined. So if I try to execute this file now, I'm going to get a traceback that tells me there's an error in my file. But Python, the IDE, had already warned me before I executed my file.
It even tells you what line to look at. That's beautiful.
Right. So I'm glad you said that. So here I executed my Python file. The way you read this is from the bottom up. You don't read it from the top down. You read it from the bottom up. So the first thing we know, this is a name error, and it's telling me name pint is not defined. Then it tells me the line where I tried to execute, and then the line number I need to look at. So whenever you're trying to execute and write Python code, you're going to get these tracebacks, and then from here, you read it from the bottom up. You take this line here, and you can paste that into Google to find out what's going on in your code. And you'll get some 10 Stack Overflow articles telling you exactly how to fix it or give you some idea on how to fix it. That's Python code in a nutshell. We're done.
Hey, no, he's joking, but he's serious too, guys. If I was to tell you guys, this is the rawest, best Python tutorial that I've seen yet. You guys at the end of this session, you guys should all be very comfortable with Python. I promise you. Keep going. Great job, Duan.
Thanks. Thank you. Now, let's go back into the Python shell. Let's clear our screen real quick. We'll go back in here, Python minus I, get into the interactive shell. You don't necessarily have to type the D minus I, but that just lets you know that you're going into the interactive shell. In this instance, now we can run our Python commands line by line execution that I mentioned in the interpreter. Something to note about the interpreter, everything in Python is an object, right? So when I type the number 3, this Python number 3 is going to be, I can look at this object, see what type it is by using the type function, and then it's going to tell me that this is an integer, right? Or let's say I want to check hello world, the string I just printed, hello world. Notice this type function tells me the type of object that I am trying to verify. In this instance, this is a string object. I mentioned everything in Python has object. Every object in Python has methods. And we'll talk about that here shortly. But if it's a string object, it has methods. Ints, not really, but they can have methods. Floats, everything in Python has methods. And what I'll show you what I mean here. And also, Python is not a strongly typed language. So what I mean by that is some languages you have to declare what type of data you're dealing with. So in this instance, let's say I have a number and I want to say 3, right? If I had to check what type of object number is, that is a variable, and it's going to tell me this is an integer. If I type number, it's 3. Now, since Python is not strongly typed, I can convert number to a string. And so now it's 3. If I look at the type, now number is a string. The reason why I'm explaining this to you, when you start to develop Python code and you start to communicate with devices, especially when you're using APIs, you're going to receive data back and you're going to have to verify the data type. You may get a data that comes back and is a number 3, but it's expecting you to pass a string and not an integer. This is a big thing about Python. Is that making sense? And so
Perfect sense.
I'll show you how to test this here shortly. I just want to kind of walk through using the interpreter and breaking down that. Now, I mentioned everything in Python is an object. So we have number, which I'm going to go ahead and convert it fully to a string. I'm going to assign it to number again, but this time I'm going to assign it as a string. And if I type number, you see these quotes around 3. Now it is a string. Before there were no quotes, so it was an integer, right? Those quotes signify a string in Python. Since everything in Python is an object, there's a function called dir. And what dir does is tells you what those methods that you can do in a string. And here are a ton of methods in this string that I can do. We're going to come back to this and I'm going to give you some examples, but I just wanted to show you that even though this number is now a string, now I can do things like I could capitalize the string, I could lowercase the string, I could capitalize the first letter in the string, I could split the entire string into a list. I have so much flexibility in power in Python. Now, let's say I need help on that object. So I want to say, okay, tell me more about how to use number in Python. So I can use help, put it inside parentheses, and now let's see, help. Okay, I guess it wants me to go ahead and put it inside str. I guess it's not going to work. I guess there's no help documentation on the number 3. I guess not. So let's do it this way. Help and on str. In other words, what I'm doing now. So this was a string. There's no methods in the help documentation for the variable that I created. But since I know the variable is a string, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find help documentation on how to use strings in Python. So what I did, str is the way you recognize strings in Python. Integers or int is how you recognize integer in Python. And then I can get help on that object. And from here, this is going to tell you everything about using the object that you're working with in Python. So if you ever want to know, okay, how do I use a function or how do I use a variable, this is going to tell you exactly how to do it. So we'll go ahead and exit out of that. We'll clear the screen. And now we're going to move on to something that I believe that you should really understand: virtual environments. Python has a concept of virtual environments. If you know anything about VMware, you know anything about containers, those containers and virtualization allows you to put a PC inside of a PC, or to create some type of resource inside of a resource. With virtual environments in Python, it allows you to have a Python virtual environment inside of your what you call a global version of Python. And now let's break down on how you do this in Python. So the first thing we're going to talk about, since we're using our interpreter, this is how you verify where your interpreter is stored. So if I do a which Python, it's going to tell me that the version of Python that I'm using is stored in this location, right? If I do Python minus version, this is going to tell me the version of Python that I'm running. Now, notice we verify my version. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create a virtual environment in Python and kind of break that down. But before we do, I want to show you one more thing. Python allows you to install. Remember I said there was over 10,000 automation packages in Python, right? Well, the packaging manager for Python to install additional software is called pip. Here we're going to do Python -m. We're going to do pip list. And this is going to show you all of my Python packages that I have installed. Not many, but I have some installed, right? So now notice for my global version of Python, this is everything I have installed. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a virtual environment. Do that by type Python -m. We're going to, the virtual environment library that we're going to use is called venv. This is the package that we're using. I need to name this virtual environment. You can name this virtual environment whatever you want. Often people name env. This in your directory. You notice that now I have a new directory that was created in Python.
Hold on 1 second.
With just
Hey, did anyone else? Hey, Rich, did he space out for you, or does it sound good?
No, I'm good. I can hear him.
Oh, must be just me. All right, continue on. Sorry, go ahead, Duan.
okay, no, that's cool. All right, so what I just did was I created a new directory or a new folder that's a virtual environment for Python. So now everything that I do in this Python virtual environment, every library that I install will be stored in that folder, which separates from my global. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to activate this virtual environment. And now notice this parentheses VNV. We are now in my virtual environment, and I'll show you how to tell this. If I do a which Python, notice that my Python interpreter directory has changed. It was here, now it's in a new directory inside the init6 folder, virtual environment, bin Python. My Python version is the same. That doesn't change that. That should be the same. If I do a pip list, so I do a Python -m pip list to see the Python libraries that I have installed. I have less Python libraries installed. The reason why is because I'm in a totally different path for my Python. I'm in my virtual environment now. So if I want to install a new package, so let's go ahead and install Netmeco Python -m Netmeco or Python -m pip install Netmeco to install a Python library called Netmeco for network automation. Now this is installed in my virtual environment. We'll go ahead and clear my screen. If I do a pip list, notice that I have more libraries installed because Netmeco has installed with all of its dependencies inside of my virtual environment. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is because when you start using Python for network automation, you're going to download code from GitHub. You're going to collaborate with people on your team. And when it starts happening, let's say I collaborate with Derek. Derek may be using Netmeco version, I don't know, 9 or Netmeco version 2.1, which is totally different version from mine. So the library that I may have installed may not have the functionality that his has installed. And so now I have different versions running on my system, which is going to cause a ton of problems if I try to uninstall this, reinstall, because I'm not going to be able to use my old code, etc. Virtual environments allows you to isolate each one of your Python packages that you create. And it's best practice to start getting used to using those now. Now let's go ahead and deactivate our virtual environment. This is how you get out of it. And let's do a Python -m. Let's do a pip list. Notice that now we're not in my Python virtual environment. Netmeco did not get installed in my global version of Python. Is that making sense to everybody?
Yes. Indeed. Yep.
All right. Cool. Let's do one more thing before we move on. Let's go ahead and get back into our virtual environment. And let's say I want to take this init6 package and I want to share it with Derek or you all, right? Well, I have all of these Python packages installed on my system. If I do a pip list, all of these packages are installed on my system. What I could do is I could export this entire list to a file that you can re-import to your system with no issue, with ease, one command. So what we'll do here is we'll do a Python minus M.
Duan, can I interrupt and
Yes,
ask a question? So
sure.
you deactivated this virtual environment, but you can
Yep.
still run ls commands against it?
No.
Oh, I see. You activated it again. Disregard.
Yes,
Sorry.
I just activated it again.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. So now what we're going to do, we're going to do a Python minus M. We'll do a pip. It's called freeze. And then we're going to output this to a requirements.txt file. And so you see the file get created on the left. And now everything to run my package or to run my application is now listed here. All the versions, all the dependencies, everything is now in this file. If I deactivate, go back into my global Python minus M, pip list. Notice that those aren't installed. But let's say I just want to install them. Let's do a Python minus M, pip minus R, or yeah, minus R, I think it's minus R first. Install, and then that requirements file. No, it's install first. Yeah. So pip install minus R, and then the requirements file. So what I'm saying is, okay, I just downloaded a package from GitHub, and now I want to add this to my global version of Python or to my different, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's create a new virtual environment because I don't want to install this globally. So we get used to creating these virtual environments. So you all know exactly what I'm doing. So VNV, and I told we can name this anything. So let's call this one init6. init6 virtual. So now we just created another virtual environment. We'll go ahead and activate that virtual environment. Source.
It's interesting. There's a pop-up on the bottom of your screen asking if you want to make that, what's gone now, but basically asking if you want to make that the default.
Yeah, that's something I want. That's something I want to bring up too. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So now we're in the init6 virtual. Let's go ahead and install. Let's do a pip list. Python minus M pip list. Notice that those packages are not installed. We'll go ahead and install them. Minus M pip install minus R requirements.txt. And now all of those requirements will be installed from that file.
Oh, wow.
Clear our screen, do a pip list, and now everything is installed under this virtual environment. It keeps your Python global version clean. It helps you create structured code and be able to collaborate with everyone with ease. Now, you mentioned something down here. Another reason why I like an IDE is I have the option down here in the left-hand corner. I know it may be hard to see, but it says the version of my Python. If I click it, now I can actually switch back and forth from each of my instances of Python that I have installed on my systems and my virtual environments right here. So if I want to go into init6, I can be into that init6 virtual environment. If I want to go into my VNV virtual environment, I can flip it right here. So as I'm developing my code in Python, all of my libraries will show up that's in that virtual environment. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Let's see how much time we got. All right.
Let it flow.
So we got time?
Oh yeah, keep going.
All right, I want to help y'all get started with developing code right now and learning how to execute code right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to download some code from my GitHub repository, and then we're going to execute that here in Python. And then we'll talk about the code that's written, and we'll kind of learn Python that way, because getting code up and running is better when you can actually do it like right now. So let's walk through that process. I'm going to pull up my GitHub, and I have some code to where I can log into a Cisco device, gather the version information, and then output it to an Excel spreadsheet. That's something that many of us have to do. We got a ton of devices that we have to manage, and we also need to know what code version they're running. We need to know the uptime, right? All of that information. What we're going to do is hop on my GitHub, click on code. We're going to copy this link here. We'll go back over to VS Code. And now what we're going to do a git clone to download that code to this directory. There's a new folder here called device info to Excel. Notice that I have a requirements.txt file, TXT file here. And if you notice, there is a different version of Netmeco here. So let's go ahead and move to that directory. We're going to, this says main because this is letting us know that this repository that we just downloaded from GitHub is a repo. It's already being managed by Git. Git is a version control management system. So as you write code, as you change your code, Git will allow you to track your changes in your code. So here's an example. So if I do Git status, it's going to tell us that I am on the main branch of this code that I just downloaded, of this repo, and that there's no changes have been made. But if I make any change, Git is going to tell me that this file has just been modified, right? Now let's go ahead and
Just
clear that.
a quick question, if you don't mind.
What's up?
Just a quick one, and you can answer now or later. Is this an extension for VS Code, or is it something that's activated in the settings? The part where it says which branch you're on.
So Git does have to be installed.
All
Is
right,
that your question?
thanks. Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, if you go through developer.cisco and go through setting up your development environment, that's one of the steps in there to set up Python, set up Git in your version control. Cool. All right. Now,
Wait, hold on
that's
one
another
second.
good point.
That's it. Well, that's it. Well, I just want to hit another. So, guys, everything that he just went over, I promise you, is preparation as well for the DevNet Associate exam. Everything,
Yep.
even Git, even So just take this all in. But most of you, if you're not following along, look at the recording and go back through. This is probably the best tutorial I've seen for Python. So please take note. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
Thanks. All good. All right, so we downloaded this code. We're going to execute this code. Let's kind of go through it line by line so you understand what's going on. Up here is my documentation. Above that, I have a shebang. My shebang allows me to tell my bash shell to use Python to execute this script without me having to type Python main.py. If I have a shebang at the top, I can just type main.py and the bash shell will know how to execute this file. Now, up under here, we have what you call a doc string. This is going to be my documentation. Inside of my documentation, this is with triple quotes. Everything inside of here is string information. This is not going to be read by the interpreter. Next, I import all of my libraries that I need to run this Python file. I have some documentation, # identifies documentation in Python. And then I have some variables. Here I get today's date, I get the path, of this data folder here, which is this device info. I go get that path for there. I open this inside of this device info. I open this Python file. This IP address file, so I can use it for this IP address list. As I open the file, I add each address in this IP address list. Let's actually add some IP addresses in here now so we can execute this script. So we'll copy these addresses, boom, in there. And now we open the document for each address in the file. We add it to this list so we can use it in Python. Next, we create our Excel worksheet or workbook, and then we add some columns and some headers inside of our workbook. Now that we have that done, we're going to open up the results file so we can add the results of if we're successfully logging into each device or not. Now we create some more variables for username and password along with the device type we're going to be logging to. And now we have a for loop that logs into each device and then outputs the information to the workbook. Let's go ahead and run this code so you can actually see it in action, and then we'll kind of break it down and work backwards on what just happened. So here we're going to execute python.main, Python, and then the argument of the file that you want to execute. We'll do that. It's going to tell us, notice I tried to execute the file and it's telling me that module error not filed. If we go up here to Python or go up here to our IDE, these modules are not installed in our Python instance right now. So if we go pip list, notice that we don't have Netmeco installed or XLS Writer installed. So what we need to do is install that requirements file. Python -m pip install -r and requirements. Let's create a virtual environment first. Python -m, create a virtual environment. Virtual environment is created here. Now we'll go through, activate our virtual environment. Boom. And now what we'll do is install that requirements file. We install that. All of our requirements are installed here in a moment. And now that we have everything installed, we can rerun our Python program. It's going to ask us for our username and password. So username to log into a device, password, log into a device. And now it's telling us that it's pinging each device and it's returning all of the device information that fast. Notice we execute the Python file. It tells us that it's attempting to ping. The ping was successful. Now it's connected to the device. And now it's giving us the host name of the device, how long the device has been up, the serial information, and the version information of each device that it logs into. And once it's done, it successfully outputted that information to this inventory file, which I will open here and show you gladly. Boom. And so if you're a manager or you're an architect and you have hundreds of thousands of devices, there's a quick Python file to tell you everything you need to know about every device on your network. Any questions about that?
Man,
Look,
I have a lot of questions.
well, hold on. This is a lot of code here, people. First and foremost, anybody who's ever been in networking that had the most tedious auditing tasks ever, just right now has a reason to take PTO, right? While this script is running. Okay, so this is gold. And I just want to witness. I just want you guys to understand what you just saw Daren do. He just went down a script that is on GitHub, right? He just went down and he showed you how to edit that script. That didn't look like hard Python. I'm sorry, yeah, it didn't look like hard Python. It looked like following descriptions of a well-documented script, right? Being able to do it, and that's for the most part, essentially, every developer is going to be doing, right? So nobody's reinventing the wheel. Everybody's sharing, everybody's documenting, and everybody's learning to feel more comfortable with Python in doing so. So, sorry, go ahead, Rich.
I mean, I see practical applications of this from a network management perspective that's off the charts. I mean, this is just like after the fact that you have the network set up, that you can run a script like this and boom, populate an entire Excel with everything in your environment. That's staggering to me. So I'm going to give you guys something that Derek and I had to do 14 years ago. We were paid by the network port up. And we spent a long, long time trying to run scripts via MIBs, by the way, to try and determine what was active versus inactive, because we were paid by the active port. We paid a lot of money to have some guy come in, Joe Blanchard, come in and run and build scripts for us back in 2006 to do what Dwan just did. I mean, and so from a practical application standpoint, I'm guessing that we could get right down to the MIB string here. Like if
Is that with SNMP when you're talking MIB? Are you talking SNMP?
Yeah, well, he's talking, but
Yeah.
he's actually referring to just the concept, right? You're actually referring to now we know the Yang model. It's actually writing scripts down to that particular managed object, right? So,
Yeah.
He's my translator.
So let's kind of, any more questions before we keep going?
So, Dirk, are you saying that it is possible for it to pull MIB data back or down?
yeah, well, that's a great point, right? So let's differentiate, right? So everybody knows how SNMP and the MIBs work, right? Keep in mind, and I'm saying this, that's legacy, right? The way that we're redoing these not we, but the way that manufacturers are redoing their models, right, is using the Yang model. So with the Yang model introduces something different. This is based off SNMP, but it does model-driven telemetry. So it's a different concept entirely. But what I would like you to keep from the SNMP is that these are managed objects, right? Just like an SNMP MIB tree is constructed, that's what the Yang model looks like. It's a more human readable SNMP MIB tree, right? But we call them managed objects. So is apples and pears. But I just want you guys to pull, the fact that he used MIB, I love that because I know where he's thinking. But with Yang, it introduced the concept of the managed object and the managed object trees. And that's, and that's where you basically get that information from. OIDs is what we did in SNMP. OID failed miserably, right? Because I can ask you guys, where can we find the managed object for OSPF? And someone may be smart in this call or whatever will say 15234. Yes, but nobody can remember that. That's an OID string, right? That's why we invented Yang. Yang has a user readable URL string, right? So that way you say, hey, where's the managed object for OSPF? You say sys. Now I could be wrong. You guys are correct, but I think it starts sys mo OSPF, and then there's your object or what have you, right? So it's a human readable factor of getting your managed information base. So that's, sorry to go nerd out, but I just wanted to make sure that we correct. That's your managed object, all right? Sorry, go ahead.
I can add something here,
Right.
don't mind.
Good.
This goes a little beyond that because with SNMP or even with Yang, the logic behind the collection of data is hidden and it's already decided.
Right.
What Dwan here is presenting is a way to influence the logic, apply the logic that you wanted. It's a pretty simple thing what you did here, but to do it with SNMP, for example, it could be a lot more difficult, and still you have to use the data in some other way. So what he's doing here is applying a human's logic and acting as an intermediate between the machines and the protocols, So applying logic to the data is something that Python is very strong for. And everything that he's presenting here is reusable chunks of code. You can cut out small pieces of that and use it on your own scripts.
Right. And what I just presented, so this I have on my GitHub at Lab Every Day is device info to Excel, fully documented. This is also on, let's see, let's go to DevNet.
HTML.
Full all the documentation on how to get it up and running and how the code works is here. It's a part of DevNet, of our developer code exchange on DevNet. Code exchange is code samples and use cases for network automation across Cisco platforms. A ton of great use cases. So make sure that you are, if you're looking for more use cases like the one I just presented, check out Code Exchange. And once you get up to speed, submit your own code for the community to use. That's what this journey is all about: collaboration. Now let's kind of work backwards if you all still have some time to kind of show you what I did. You all okay with that?
Absolutely.
Duan, I have a question before you start going backwards.
Okay.
Basically, is any dependencies in this Python program regards the device type? Meaning CLI is different if you have Cisco Nexus or no different types. The commands would be different. Is the script is basically targeting specific devices? Is the question?
Right. So this script targets Cisco iOS.
iOS
Great
only.
question. Yes, iOS.
The reason why
That's a
I'm
great.
asking is for this one. Most of the companies are using also Netbox, right? Or for source or true, right? Basically. Now, when you want to discover elements and you don't have that source, is possible. Have you seen a smart Python script that is discovering the type of the CLI and then applying the right commands?
Yes, it is. Let's kind of talk about that's a great question. So if you wanted to write a script that does discovery, we can actually just use this main.py. Let's say I wanted to use the Netmeco library to log into a device, right? Top of my code, first line is going to be Netmeco. And what Netmeco does, and here's the actual library here, it allows you to connect to all types of devices, not just Cisco, not just iOS, but different platforms as well. And here's the documentation on Netmeco. It's developed by Kurt Byers. He did a great job on it. You can research it depending on the platform that you're looking for. But let's say you have 10 different platforms in your environment. Well, the next thing, I could create a function. Let's say my function is to connect to a Cisco device. I come over here. This is my function. And what it does is when I execute the function, I pass in an IP address. The IP address goes to the device. Well, what I could essentially do is I could pass in the device type. So every time I execute the script, it's going to ask me for my username and password, as well as I pass in the IP address, as well as I pass in the device type, right? Also need to import getPass. GetPass allows me to enter my password so nobody can see it. And I'll show you all how this works. And now, once I execute this function, which is about 5 lines of code, it's going to return a connection to a device. Now, what I could come up here and do, I could create a device type list. And I could list out all of the supported devices types that Netmeco supports, right? And so every time I execute this script, what I could essentially do, if I don't know the device type, I could create what you call a try block. try block to run this code every time. And if not successful, I could create, let me see, I could create a if statement inside of here or an exception to say, okay, if I get this error, and then once I get the exception, let's say, I don't know what the exception is, but we can just say as or error. We can just say exception. And then from here, I could say, I could have it try a different version. You get what I'm saying? So basically, it would loop through until it has a successful connection of the device type. Is that kind of making sense?
Yes, it does, the one. Thank you.
Orlando, what he's doing is a lot smarter than what I did. So, like, I learned from you all the time, Duan. So, what I did was, when you use this library, right? You can use regular expression. So, all I did was because I had to go out of the Cisco realm, I wasn't smart like a Duan. I didn't look for a device type. I removed device type, and matched on prompt, and that's a very p expect way to do it, but but I did it that way. So that's nice. Thank you, Duan. You just showed me how crappy my code was already. Beautiful.
I, I'm gonna be 100% honest. So the use case that you're talking about, I've had examples like that. But what I would do in this instance, again, I would pull up my Python interpreter and I would write that code out and test it in the interpreter. And then once I figure out how to get it work, then I would put my code up here into my actual code. You follow me, Orlando?
Yes, I follow you. Thank you, the one. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Um,
And well, in either case, Orlando, I promise you, and you guys, and this is what Duan's been showing me, how flexible you always have an answer in Python. How flexible this is, and how easy it is to come up with a workaround or solution based on what you're trying to accomplish. So, this is gold. This video, this session's gold. Go ahead. Sorry, Duan.
that's cool. So when you look at the code I created previously, to kind of go back to this code here, all of this code is not reusable. This is a one-time script. Every time you want to run this code, you put your IP addresses in there. It runs, prompts you for a username and password. It does what it's supposed to do. There's several things wrong with the script. For one, is it's line by line execution, which is fine. It's not reusable. Fine, that's fine as well. And what I mean by reusable is meaning that I can't import it to another code sample. I can only run it from this script that one time. So if I wanted to just take logging into a device or just take the Excel portion and add it to another script, I can't do that in this example. So that's one problem. Another problem is I don't have any type of error handling in this script. So what I mean by that is if it goes through this for loop, logs into one device successful, the second device is not successful, it's going to break and the whole script will stop. Python gives you the ability to say, okay, if you are unsuccessful, output this to the results file, let me know what's going on, or output failure on my Excel spreadsheet, and then continue on to the next one without breaking the script. So if you got 1,000 devices, you add that error handling inside of your script, and then from there, now you can go through all 1,000 devices and have a list that you can sort to say successful or unsuccessful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about reusable code. Those functions in Python. Here, I'm using Netmeco to log into a device, and then from there, I can reuse this block of code into another script. I can import it, or I could just continue to log into devices. I could create another function to say once you're logged into the device, now I want you to get me the device info, right? So every time I execute this function, I pass in connect and the command that I want to execute on the device. That command could be anything. I could say show IP interface brief. You know what? Let's go ahead and do this real quick. So I can show you all what I'm talking about. I think being visual is way better. This if statement here allows me to execute this code and start my code and import my code. And so this is the main Python file, and it knows that this is my executable and run this code. So let's go ahead and exit out of here, and I'm going to get back into my main directory, clear this out, and we're going to execute this Python code. And we're going to do that by leveraging the sandboxes. So we're going to do python.main. It's going to ask me the IP. From here, I'm going to enter the address of the sandbox device that I want to access. It's asking me for a device type. So here, there's that traceback, connect. Remember I changed this to the device type. Now, when I execute this command here for net connect, I only have IP, so I need to pass in the device type as well. And that device type is going to be Cisco iOS. Are you all following along?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yep. So let's execute this again. Now we'll pass that in one more time. The username is going to be developer. And then we'll pass in the password. And now it's asking me for the show command. What show command would y'all want me to run?
Show
Show version. Sure. One more thing I need to import. Pretty print.
Print module.
Pretty print module. Yes, that's what it's telling me. So it's telling me, okay, on line 27, when it tried to execute this pretty print on this line 28 right here, that module is not imported. So I need to go from pretty print, import pretty print, which is a function in Python to print things out and make them look pretty readable for us all in Python. So we'll go ahead and do that. Copy that again. Enter the username. And now we're going to do a show version. And there is our show version on the device. And now this is reusable code. So I can reuse this code over and over. I can import it to another file and constantly reuse this code and continue to build upon this. If I want to execute it again, copy an IP, developer, Cisco 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do a show run. And now show run returns.
That's awesome.
And the way this code is set up, when I actually execute the script, all of the commands below are going to be executed. So I actually have a variable that's asking me my input for the command that I want to enter. Now, if I want to reuse this code, I can just pass that in manually. But in this instance, I'm asking the user, okay, what command do you want to get from the device? And if I had a list of devices, I could tell this for IP. I could create a list of IPs, and that command would be ran on every device. And then I could create another function to, let's say, output each show run into its own file. And so now I'm backing up all the the running configs in my environment. Is that making sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You can create like a backup even of the configuration of those devices, no? Just by
Yes.
adding those commands. Yes.
Yep. And it's very simple. It's very simple. Any questions?
At what point would you insert that error handling if you were testing a lot of different devices and say one failed or you didn't get the response back from that? At what point in your code would you enter that error handling that you spoke of earlier?
Yeah, let's do it right now. Let's see. So I'm gonna create a rather than returning it here, I'm gonna create a try block here. It's called a try block. And so I want it to return. If it doesn't return, I want it to accept. Now, Netmeco has several different. Netmeco has several different. Yeah, let me do this. Copy. Let's go back so I can show you. And we'll return that. I'm gonna execute this script one more time, and I'm gonna enter a bad IP. Or no, I'm gonna enter the right IP, and I'm gonna enter the wrong username and password so we can kind of see what the error is. All right, so at this point, the script's going to break. I entered the wrong username and password. And Netmeco has this exception. So this raised Netmeco exception, what I could do is I could import this exception. So from Netmeco, import, let me see, where is that at? Netmeco or SSH. Yeah, SSH exception. And the specific exception I want to import is going to be Netmeco. It's going to be netmeco.ssh exception import, and it's going to be Netmeco, and it's going to be authentication exception. So now what I did is Python is going to recognize this error as an exception. It's going to catch it whenever I use this try block that I'm about to create. So in the same function, I'm going to create a try block, mean try to execute this. And if it fails, exception as, let's say I want to do it as file. And at this point, I could say login failed, or I could have it execute the script again. Login failed, try again. So it's going to print that, and then it's going to call the script again. So it's going to be recursive. And now if I execute the script again, and I enter the IP address of the device, wrong password, fail to log in and try again. You see that? Is that
Yes, sir.
simple?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
So would it do the same if it was able to, if it was not able to communicate with one of the devices that you had in your list of IP address?
That's going to be a different exception. So if we try it again, let's break this one up and we'll execute it again. Let's say I entered the wrong IP address. And wrong password. See, now is Netmeco timeout exception. So I had to import that exception and do the same thing. And you can actually stack these to where it kind of knows all of them. So it'd be like a comma. But then if I did that, it's not going to tell me which exception it was. So you may have to do multiple exceptions up under this try block. So you will have one try block and then multiple exceptions underneath and have it give you a different print error. Does that make sense?
Yes.
and I can show you if it is better for you to see it. So we would take that, and actually I probably can put a comma. Yep, we can just put a comma, timeout. I would throw another exception, and we would change this to Netmeco timeout exception, and unable to connect to device. And if we run this again, there you go.
Okay.
That's what's up.
This is cool.
That's what's up.
Yeah, it's powerful, and that's what I mean. Like with the script to where you log into devices and export the show version to the Excel spreadsheet. You just create a try block like this, and it'll go through however many devices you got in your list, and then rather than print it to the screen, you can have it output it to a file. So, hope y'all found this helpful.
Very, very.
Yeah,
This
this
is
has been amazing.
Cool.
all right.
Any questions?
There you go. Any questions from anybody?
I got a question for the one. Usually, what extensions do you use in Visual Studio Code? What are the most popular, no, in Europe development?
Let's see what I use. I think for me, I use spell checking. I like to know if I spell things right. Docker, Go, graphics, which allows you to create diagrams. Terraform, of course, Jupyter notebooks, Markdown, lint. So I do a lot of markdowns, and this allows me to lint my markdowns to make sure I got the right documentation and I'm using the right formatting in my markdowns. Python linting, remote containers to be able to run Docker containers, SQL tools, and some more Terraform.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
Anybody else? Did we miss anybody? Hey,
I
Duan.
have questions. I have comments, so I'm holding back.
No, let's hear those comments.
Yeah, I want to hear your comments. I love feedback.
No, it's just I want to help people understand a little better because you've shown them the real magic here. Uh, if you ever programmed in languages before, like Perl or TCL with expect and stuff like that, back then we didn't really have that much control in our hands because what we were getting back was a string input, and we had to get a string output and parse it with expressions and stuff like that in order to get to something more useful. Right now, you're witnessing something that has multiple layers inside of it. So you
Yep.
have Netmeco with text FSM. You can see down there in the below. You see what Duan has written down in the return statement. So this part there is what is getting those commands that that Duan ran, and it's breaking them down into data. And he showed you with the PP print that data broken down in bits which you can pick up. Just use the ones you want. No regular
Yep.
expressions there. It's already being done under the hood. But there's
Yep.
also more there. He's using Netmeco, which is already integrating logic in order to figure out what the command prompt is, if it's in the command configuration mode or if it's in execution mode. Is it iOS? Is it NXOS? How does this command work here or in the other environment? And under there, there's another layer as well. There's the Mentorship library, which is being used by Netmeco, which we don't see anywhere, which is handling the SSH part. So it's handling the timeouts where you're waiting for feedback, because the whole script and the library is impersonating the human. The program is doing what a human would do. It's logging into the device with SSH, it's getting back the prompt, it's issuing another command, it's getting back another prompt. All that stuff is happening without you noticing anything and without you having to write a single line of code. So we've gone through so much progress from the part we were using either Perl or TCL, and now we're using Python with so much power for data manipulation in our hands, and all these libraries with people who have already deployed those projects, and we're using their work. And just like Duan has shown his work, and we can reuse his work again. This is the actual revolution here: the collaboration, the reusability, how you can build on top of these things.
Yep.
So I'm sure that if you watch the recording again, it's like what Derek said. You're gonna discover gems here. That's all. Next one.
No, you made a really great point. So when I first started my network automation journey, I had to update and wipe 729.21 router switch modules, right? I had to replace the switch modules with, what was it, 2960Xs. And in order to do that, I had to copy the configs to the 2960Xs. And then once they were back online and the network was back up, I had to log into the 29, I think they were 2921s, and wipe the switch module so they could pull it out. One of the things I ran into with Netmeco was that timeout, because I don't know if you ever had to get into the switch modules of a router, but that timeout can be, it depends on the device. And so
Especially with Telnet. If you had Telnet, it's even more problem.
Right. And so what I had to do was I had to, rather than sending commands to command sets and commands to through Netmeco, I had to actually send write commands and check the prompt of the device. And if it was the prompt I was expecting, then I would send a write command with a new line command. So it was essentially like I was sitting at the device, but I was using Netmeco line by line, because there's so much when you use Netmeco send command that it's doing that carriage return at the end, but the write command doesn't do that. So I had to really dive in and understand what was going on under the hood in order to make my script work the way it needed to work. Cool. I hope you all found this useful and helpful.
You got that. This is
Definitely found
extremely
this
helpful.
useful.
Hey, so
Yeah.
everyone else that's on this call, you know.
Do you understand that now?